Hi, I'm Samuel C. Spitali, author of How to Win the War on Truth. In this video, we'll look at the truth about lynching. When we think of lynchings, we might call to mind the brutal murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till in 1955, who was kidnapped, beaten, shot in the head, and thrown into the Tallahatchie River. Or we might recall the three civil rights workers kidnapped and murdered by the KKK in the summer of 1964, as depicted in the film Mississippi Burning. But most lynchings, however, were not some clandestine act carried out under the cover of night. Most were public spectacles held in the light of day and even promoted in local newspapers. They were part carnival, part torture chamber, complete with food vendors and souvenir booths, drawing crowds of hundreds and even thousands of people, including children, who described the event as the biggest thing since Ringling Brothers Circus. Public lynchings occurred most often in areas with the largest church congregations. Because so many evangelical Christians in their churches participated in the lynchings, they were often scheduled on Sunday after church service in order to attract the largest crowds. At the KKK's peak in 1924, the vast majority of their 8 million members were white evangelicals. Thus, Protestant churches were frequent recruitment centers for the Klan. Lynching's victims were not limited to black men, but also included women and even children. Sometimes the lynch mob would jam a poker into the victim's eyes, or repeatedly thrust a red-hot iron brand against their body. Sometimes they'd burn off the person's genitals with a clothes iron, or pour kerosene on the person and light them on fire, then watch them burn alive, which they jokingly refer to later as a barbecue. The white mob would mutilate them, torture them, decapitate, and dismember them. Then they'd cut up the rope used in the lynching and sell pieces as souvenirs. Spectators would even take home the victim's severed toes or fingers as a keepsake. And the horror was all captured on film. Photographers were tipped off in advance and installed portable printing presses at the lynching sites to sell to lynchers and onlookers like photographers at a prom. They made postcards out of the prints for people to send to their loved ones. Some people framed the lynching photographs with locks of the victim's hair under glass. Lynching postcards were so common that lynching scenes became a burgeoning subdepartment of the postcard industry. By 1908, the trade had grown so large, and the practice of sending postcards featuring the victims of mob murderers had become so repugnant that the U.S. Postmaster General banned the cards from the mail. But the new edict did not stop Americans from sharing their lynching exploits. From then on, they merely put the postcards in an envelope. The photos of lynchings were often staged like those of hunting trophies, with a group of white men gathered around the victim, smiling proudly at their capture. Thousands of these postcards were distributed across the United States. Yet hardly anyone who carried out the lynchings were ever punished for their crimes, and no state official, no local police, nor the federal government ever intervened to stop them. In fact, many of the lynchers were community leaders, elected officials, and even police officers. And if they weren't, the perpetrators would be deputized as law enforcement, which absolved them from the repercussions. In nearly all cases, the black victim had committed no crime. Lynching was not a form of vigilante justice. It was a scare tactic used to maintain the social order, a way for white businessmen to rid the community of their black competitors, which is why the targets were frequently upwardly mobile African Americans who were acquiring wealth and property, thereby violating the hierarchy of white supremacy. By terrorizing the black community with the threat of lynching, black people were made afraid to improve their lives, thus maintaining the racial hierarchy. To justify the lynchings, white people frequently accused black business owners of raping or insulting a white woman, which became grounds for their violence. This was a tried and true rationale for white on black violence since the Civil War. In reality, a white man was far more likely to rape a black woman than the other way around. It was so prevalent in the South that today 1 in 3 African American males carries a Y DNA signature, inherited from a direct white male ancestor. These startling results could only reflect the frequency of the rape of black women by white men during slavery. From the end of the Civil War to 1950, white Americans lynched at least 6,500 black people, an average of more than 1 killing a week for close to 80 years, and occurring in 46 of the 50 United States. For more than a century, the government failed to pass an anti-lynching law. It wasn't until 2022 that the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act was finally passed. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of America's history of lynching is not the savagery of the public execution, or the barbaric torture, or its ritualistic participation, or the sheer number of spectators, but its normalization, what philosopher and Holocaust survivor Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil, the everyday acceptance of how otherwise normal human beings can be conditioned to participate in horrid acts of inhumanity. That the same good Christians attending church Sunday morning were the very ones murdering one of God's children mere moments later. Unfortunately, the legacy of lynching and its public spectacle has been all but erased from history books by those who refuse to acknowledge our country's shameful past. Because if we did acknowledge it, then we might finally have to atone for it. If you'd like to read more, check out my book, How to Win the War on Truth, and be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.